Thanks everyone for joining today's webinar on Roadmaps Regenerative presented by NS. Our goals for today's presentation are an overview of why regeneration is important, an explanation of what regenerative agriculture is, who's a part of the regenerative movement, and some tips on how to make building a regenerative program as easy as possible and ideas of how to get started. Our speakers today are Sarah Newmark, Vice President of Social Impact at MegaFood, Tina Owens, Senior Director of Regenerative Agriculture at Danone North America, and NSF's Nova Sayre, Senior Manager of Business Development for Sustainability. And with that, Nova, I'm going to hand it over to you.
So welcome, everyone. You might be wondering what happened to the term sustainability and why are we using this word regenerative? So I just want to explain that for a moment. Sustainability taken literally means sustaining what we've got now or keeping the status quo. And that's simply no longer enough. Too much damage has already been done. Science and our common sense are telling us that we're approaching the limits of what our ecosystems and communities can endure. So we need to reverse some of that damage and renew what's been lost. That is why we're using the term regenerative. It literally means to recreate, to regenerate, to restore, and renew. Today, we'd like to inspire you to make regeneration part of your business model through your sourcing, because food, textiles, and cosmetics companies source huge amounts of agricultural raw materials. And it turns out that agriculture can be a heroic regenerator. That means that companies like yours that source agricultural inputs can be catalysts for regeneration. So we're going to explain how. Next slide, please. You might find this a little bit hard to believe. After all, we know that agriculture, as it has been practiced for more than 50 years, has produced massive quantities of crops and cheap food in many countries. But at the same time, it's led to deforestation, desertification, species loss, water contamination, poor farming communities, and sad lives for animals. So there are quite a few problems inside of our food and agriculture system. In addition, food and agriculture is responsible for about 25 to 30% of greenhouse gas emissions. And about 80% of those greenhouse gas emissions from food and agriculture actually come from that agricultural and farming supply base. Food and agriculture is also responsible for a whopping 70% of available water resource use. And one of the most alarming facts I wanted to share with you is that the United States is losing about 1.7 billion tons of topsoil annually. That is also responsible for quite a bit of those carbon emissions. All of that carbon that used to be stored in that soil that's been eroded is now being released into the atmosphere. So these are not conditions that we want to sustain. In fact, the latest Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has told us that we have to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 45% in the next 10 years. And then we have to reduce those emissions down to zero by 2050 in order to keep global warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius and to avoid the most catastrophic effects of climate change. So that's a really important call to action for everyone on the webinar today. Next slide. Luckily, there is a solution available to us, and it's literally in our industry and beneath our feet. It turns out that soil has the largest potential to store carbon of any system on planet Earth, more than the oceans or the atmosphere. That means we can not only stop emitting carbon and stop being part of the problem, we can actually pull carbon back down into the soil where it's beneficial. On this next slide, we show you the carbon cycle on farms. As you can see here, if we restore the precious soil that we depend on to produce that food and fiber our industries need, we can also help solve climate change and provide other valuable ecosystem services. Next slide. Regenerative farming practices have been shown to increase soil organic matter from about 1 to 2%, which is fairly average level today in U.S. agriculture to over 8% soil organic matter in a span of between 5 to 10 years. Studies are also showing us that healthy soils can sequester about 3 times more carbon than they do today. I'm hoping some of you are already familiar with Project Drawdown, but they're a great resource. They rank 100 solutions for drawing down carbon from the atmosphere to solve climate change. And according to them, regenerative agriculture could deliver about 1/3 of the total carbon drawdown that we need to reach that goal of zero emissions by 2050 and restore climate balance. Also, a movement in the French government called the 4 per 1,000 initiative shows that if we were able to increase the carbon stock in soils around the world by just 4%, it would make it possible for us to totally stop the increase in atmospheric carbon emissions. So all of these facts point to a golden opportunity for our industries, food, textile, and cosmetics, to work with their farm suppliers to solve these most urgent crises. Next slide, please. Now I want to show you what some of those regenerative practices are, and I hope these slides are helpful. They're courtesy of an organization called Kiss the Ground. The regenerative practices described here include no-till farming, planting of multiple cover crops and varied crop rotations, including perennials and tree crops that are not harvested and replanted each year, and also agroforest and a practice called silvopasture. The use of compost and mulch, and most importantly, reduced chemicals go along with that no-till agriculture or minimal till farming method. I just wanted to share these slides because I think they're really illustrative for understanding what we mean when we say regenerative agriculture in terms of practices. There's also a helpful definition out there that was put forward by California State University and the Carbon Underground. According to this definition, which was signed by dozens of companies and organizations, regenerative agriculture is a holistic land management practice that leverages the power of photosynthesis in plants to close the carbon cycle and build health, crop resilience, and nutrient density. So with that, I want to move on and show you some important new tools in the regenerative space. Keeping those regenerative agricultural practices in mind that you just saw, nearly everyone agrees that we need to measure our progress toward regeneration and climate goals. We need to track and provide proof that what we're doing is working. This is where standards are particularly useful. They help us measure progress. I'm showing several standards on the screen here, but I want to explain how standards work. Standards lay out a roadmap for good practices. And when they're combined with verification, this creates accountability and feedback to promote progress. Standards also lay out methods for us to measure outcomes consistently so that we're talking about the same impacts and the same progress from company to company, industry to industry. When standards include verification, particularly in the regenerative space, and we communicate the impact of regenerative agriculture from farms, from buyers to shoppers and investors, we can create the transparency and trust that's needed to build a regenerative marketplace. And that's why our organization, NSF, began working on regenerative agriculture standards. So let me explain these 4 standards that I'm sharing on the screen. One of them is a certification, 2 are verifications, and 1 is a self-assessment. I'm going to briefly describe them because we could literally spend an hour or more on each one, and we intend to go into a deep dive in future webinars. I'm going to start with 2 of the standards that NSF is currently working on. First, Regenerative Organic Certified. This is a holistic certification program designed to promote 3 dimensions of regenerative agriculture, or pillars. You can see them here: soil health, pasture-based animal welfare, and fairness for farmers and workers on farms. This program requires organic certification as a baseline for entry and auditing of unique ROC practice-based requirements in each of those other pillar areas, in addition to soil sampling and lab testing. The ROC program offers on-product labeling using a certification mark and it can be used globally for all crops and animal farming systems. We're currently in a pilot phase with this program, and there are several brands and farmers testing it around the world. The next standard here is called the Soil Carbon Initiative. SCI is an outcomes-based framework that includes verification and recognition of achievement. SCI asks farmers to demonstrate commitments in 4 areas, and it requires soil sampling and testing to measure indicators of soil health. The 4 indicators are shown here. Those are soil organic carbon, water holding capacity, aggregate stability, and microbial biomass. These 4 indicators help us to produce 2 targeted outcomes of soil health and soil carbon sequestration. Farm participants in this program receive a score and a stamp of participation. It is not currently offering an on-product label claim, but participants will be able to communicate about their impact. This program is currently available for public comment online until May 5th, so please submit your feedback. The next framework I want to share, or tool, let's call it, is the General Mills Regenerative Agriculture Scorecard. This is an open source self-assessment tool, and it scores 19 on-farm practice areas to measure 3 outcomes of soil health, above ground biodiversity, and economic resilience of farming communities. It recognizes 3 levels of performance. General Mills is piloting this now, along with soil sampling and testing. This assessment does not involve any product labeling or broad claims yet, but it's a useful tool for brands to use with their farm suppliers. The scorecard is currently published on General Mills' website, and it's available for public use. And I want to end with another new program, the Land to Market Ecological Outcomes Verified program. This is designed specifically for grazing lands and livestock farms. LTM is a landscape level assessment. It tracks ecological outcomes for biodiversity, soil health, water infiltration, and carbon sequestration. It includes farmer training and annual monitoring of indicators performed by trained verifiers. When positive trends in ecological outcomes are demonstrated, the program allows the use of an on-product seal, and there are actually labeled products out in the marketplace now. You can visit the Savory Institute's website for more details on this. As I said, there's a whole lot more detail in each of these programs, but we don't have time for that today. What I do want to point out to you, though, is that these frameworks can be used at different stages in your regenerative program and in different supply networks for the various ingredients that you source. They're actually complementary, and some companies are going to use more than one of them. And used together, they describe a path of continuous improvement, which is what we need. All of them focus on agronomic practices that build soil health and sequester carbon. So let's move on. I wanted to share with you some of the leaders who are helping to promote regenerative agriculture. On this slide, I'm just giving you a sampling. Know that this regenerative movement is very fast growing, and it includes all sectors of society: business, civil organizations, government, and universities. What's important to know is that this movement is largely led by companies across the food, textile, and cosmetics industries, working together in coalitions and setting ambitious goals to regenerate. Wouldn't you like your company to join this list? We hope to encourage you to do that by the end of this webinar. Today, we want you to learn from the experience of 2 companies with very different approaches to regeneration, but they're also allies. One is a company producing both dairy and plant-based foods, and the other is a US-based natural supplements brand. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our guest, Tina Owens from Danone.
Thank you, Nova. I appreciate that. So hello, everyone. I'm Tina Owens. I lead regenerative agriculture within Danone North America, and I joined Danone in 2018. I'm responsible for the implementation of regenerative agriculture across the full spectrum of Danone's brands and business units within North America. In case you're wondering who Danone is, we're the largest yogurt brand within the US market, work with over 600 dairies to source our milk, including a large organic dairy footprint. And we're one of the largest food companies in the world, So we have brands like Dannon Yogurt, Horizon Organic, So Delicious, Silk, Activia, International Delight, and even Evian Water. So quite a broad portfolio. And Danone is also the world's largest B Corp. And so we have a triple bottom line approach related to people, planet, profit. And our mission is to bring health through food to as many people as possible. And Danone's approach to regenerative has been transparent from the start. We've shared milestones and intentions publicly since 2016 when we announced our intention to review soil health and carbon sequestration. And this set the stage for an agricultural team to be created within Danone. And this group in turn began working on building a soil health program and the regenerative strategy that we're operating under today. And what's noteworthy is that at the time that we began this, there was no framework like Soil Carbon Initiative or Regenerative Organic Certification. So unlike the folks attending this call, we had to start from scratch in creating a soil health and regenerative platform without a roadmap. So you guys are already a step ahead of us by being able to leverage the expertise of NSF and others in this space. So what we did to create our own program from scratch, and I'll lead into where we're at on the certifications, just the steps that we had to take over the last few years. Some examples and approaches are that over a year ago, we publicly announced our intention to commit $6 million to soil research and tracking, and to use our access to dairies and farms to create a pilot program. So in our baseline year, we recruited 26,000 acres into the pilot and worked with a third party called EcoPractices to get field level data and map how our farms were performing in areas of planting cover crops, crop rotation, and other regenerative practices. During this time, we also announced that we would join the Soil Carbon Initiative, which was being led by the Carbon Underground and Green America. That's one of the standards we're discussing today, in which NSF is leading the verification and certification piece of this standard. So joining with industry groups allow us to work with the industry thought leaders on how to move more farmers and companies into the regenerative space, while also helping us to refine our internal strategy on regenerative. In order to create some of this information that you see here with EcoPractices, we typically worked with farms that were part of our cost plus model, in which were already receiving a premium from us or were under long-term contracts to empower the farms to adopt new practices and ways of thinking. So again, this is work that we had to create from scratch, where you can start a step ahead in working with these now public certifications that are available. So because of the size of Danone and our house of brands, we're able to take multiple approaches at once. So my role at Danone is to lead each of these outcomes to one cohesive regenerative agricultural strategy. You'll notice here that the three approaches each has a different audience. So Regenerative Organic Certified is brand and consumer facing, and Regenerative Organic Certified, known as ROC for short, is driving the organic industry to move towards a continuous improvement model and to engage consumers in unlocking their power through purchase to incentivize brands who embrace an industry-leading stance in the organic space. So ROC relies on organic at its base and then builds on that foundation. And in addition to soil health, it also layers in critical elements around animal welfare and social fairness, like living wages for participating farms and processors. And the reason Vega and Horizon Organic logos are there is because we are part of the two pilot programs that are being tested currently as the ROC standard comes to life. In contrast, SCI, the Soil Carbon Initiative, is working across all different types of agriculture to meet farmers where they are at on the journey and recruit them into regenerative practices specifically to sequester carbon as the outcome. And this can be a way to invite farmers into the regenerative space as part of a continuous improvement model that does not explicitly require farms to be pursuing non-GMO or organic approaches. And lastly, we continue to expand and work on our internal approach with our partners like EcoPractices and Cornell University. And we are advancing that strategy by being part of this collaborative ecosystem of regenerative players. And we'll continue to look for ways to embed these industry-leading approaches within our brand and supply chain strategies. So in summary, I want you to ask the question, why would your organization join a regenerative standard? At Danone, we look at this as an investment in stabilizing our supply chain, both from a climate impact perspective and for farmer resiliency. as well as meeting our B Corp commitment around our impact to people, planet, and profit. When we began this journey to regenerative, there was no roadmap. So those looking to join the movement now have a framework to follow rather than having to seek out experts and cobble together their own network within the industry. So if you're a decision maker around regenerative within your business, I would encourage you to review both ROC, and the Soil Carbon Initiative to see whether one of these approaches can advance your overall business goals for responsible sourcing, supply chain stability, and climate impact. With that, I'll turn it back over to you, Nova.
But my name is Sarah Newmark. I'm the Vice President of Social Impact at Megafood. And I wanted to give a little bit of a different angle of how we're coming at regenerative, which Nova mentioned. Many of you on the call may be inspired to hear what Danone North America is doing, and I have been for years working with them on some of our initiatives together. But as a smaller brand, we thought it would be really helpful to hear the type of commitments that you can make if you don't have all of the access to either the investments or just the breadth of their organization as Danone does. I wanted to tell you a little bit about Megafood. As Nova mentioned, we are a U.S.-based vitamin and herbal supplement brand. And what's really unique about Megafood is our connection to farmers. We make a lot of our tablets and vitamins and supplements directly at our facility in New Hampshire. And what that allows us to do, which is unique in the supplement space and unique maybe even in the food space generally, is have this direct connection to our farms. We do source from many different farmers in many different ways around the world, but we have these unique, deep partnerships where we can learn from our farming community what they need and how to better serve them while making sure that we stay true to our commitment and our mission, which is curing a world in nutritional crisis. And as the Vice President of Social Impact, my role is to really understand on the environmental and social side how we can achieve a larger mission of curing a world in nutritional crisis. And so our aspiration is to transform agriculture by empowering communities, revolutionizing food systems, and committing to radical transparency. And we came about this goal because we understood the unique connection between soil and nutrient density. As our soils have degraded, so is the nutritional capacity and density of our food. Food today is on average 40% less nutrient dense than it was 50 years ago. And understanding that and understanding some of the real challenges that we're facing that Nova outlined and the real opportunity, we knew this was the place where we wanted to really invest. And so to accomplish these aspirations, we've made some pretty big commitments. We know that we need to operate with purpose, and that means looking at everything that we do within our business, to from the manufacturing of our products, to our packaging, to our employees, but also cultivating a community of regenerative and transparent suppliers in order to uplift and meet those goals. We also know that we can't do it alone, that we need to shift systems, that we believe in the power of business to drive systemic change. That's part of the work as a certified B Corp that we're doing, but that's also the collaboration among industry, like the Soil Carbon Initiative that we've been a part of for over 2 years now on the design team, working with Danone and others like NSF, the Carbon Underground, and Green America to shift the way that we do business in order to radically and rapidly drive change. And the last kind of pillar that we look at when we want to make sure that we are working every day to meet this larger aspiration is to engage our tribe, to make sure to know that while we need to operate with purpose, we need to shift a system, but we can't do that without engaging in policy activism, that those three things hopefully will lead us forward as we hope to see regenerative agriculture and this transformation of the way that we buy and use food to meet these larger climate goals that we have. Next slide. So part of the way that we are using this, the Soil Carbon Initiative, again, this outcomes-based standard that we've been working on for the last 2+ years, It is in fact a standard. It is not a certification, as Nova had outlined, and that makes it really unique. We want to make sure that we're all operating off the same methodologies and measurement systems when looking at soil health, because we have big goals and we need to make sure that we're meeting those goals. And that is done by looking at outcomes. But the beauty of this standard is that it's interoperable with many different standards. So all of the standards and all of the opportunities, standards, certifications that you saw on the screen that Nova presented, plus many others, could use this standard, this Soil Carbon Initiative standard for soil health, as a way that you measure and monitor for the increase of soil health. So that's what we are doing at MegaFood. We are launching this week our Healthy Farm Standard. And this is an internal standard that we're going to be using in our supply chain. However, we're going to be making it public and available for anybody to use. But it's really a partnership program with our supply community to help meet joint goals. And it's a scorable survey that will look at building soil health, conserving resources, and supporting thriving livelihoods. And the way that we are going to bring in Soil Carbon Initiative is that all of our suppliers are required to participate in our standard, but we are building in an incentive model that those that are receiving that incentive must participate in the Soil Carbon Initiative. And I'm going to go into a little bit later about the incentives, because it was important as a design criteria of the Soil Carbon Initiative and also within our own standard that farmers no longer bear the burden of programs that we impose on them. Something that I think is so beautiful about the Soil Carbon Initiative is that it allows farmers to operate within the context of their own farm, to make decisions about practices and how they relate to outcomes that are unique to them, and really puts the power to make change in the hands of those who really know it best. Our farmers. Farmers are the interface between planet and people, and they know more than any of us what it takes to get something done. And so we really want to decouple standards and obligations and farmer burden, and really give incentives, help farmers achieve these goals that will benefit all of us. So next slide. So like I said, we have 3 pillars for our standard: and building soil, conserving resources, and supporting thriving livelihoods. And based underneath all of that are these certifications and system-wide measures that we are going to be looking at. Like I said, ours is a points-based standard. And so as we have our own internal indicators for building soil health, that as SCI certification gets up and SCI standard gets up and running, we are going to be using that as the pillar and the indicator for outcomes for soil health. And all of that, again, like I said, is the foundation of that is our incentivizing farmers through farm investments and consulting services so that they can reach these shared goals that we all have. Next slide, please. Similar to SCI, which is also a points-based system, ours is going to be points-based as well. We really designed something in order to really partner with the Soil Carbon Initiative to make it easy to implement. And, I think we are on this journey where we did develop something internally, but we did benefit from the work of others like General Mills, like Danone, and like and we were able to do it in parallel with the Soil Carbon Initiative design team and planning, so that we could make sure that it was really easy for us to bring it internally and execute it internally, but more importantly, that farmers weren't getting inundated with lots of different requests, lots of different types of questions for lots of different answers that they would have to spend a lot of time doing. We wanted to make sure that our questions lined up with this larger standard that we hope everyone and all farmers around the world will be using to measure soil health. Next slide, please. Oh, I lost the slide. Well, I'll speak it, but it's our incentive program. And like I said, it's really important for us to be making sure that we aren't doing this by just demanding that our farming and supplier community answer our questions or participate in the Soil Carbon Initiative, that we need to make sure that we are incentivizing them and partnering with them along the way. Long term, the incentive really is soil health. Any farmer you talk to, no farmer, no matter where they fall on their political views or where they live in this world, will ever argue against soil health. And soil health in the long term will provide the most benefit to a farmer and to their farming operations and community. In the meantime, we need to make sure that we're incentivizing them along the way. So what we've done at MegaFood is built a program that, depending upon what level you're at, bronze, silver, or gold, we will incentivize you to complete the survey. And if you land at those points, we'll actually give you money, anywhere from $1,000 to $15,000. Oh, there it is. To invest on your farm in one of our 3 pillars, whether it's in thriving communities by paying your workers better wages, whether it's money that would go to building soil health that would allow you to participate or use it in the Soil Carbon Initiative and fund the testing requirements there, or whether it be in conservation of resources through on-site investment on your farm. We want to make sure that they have the ability to use those investments any which way they choose, so that we could, again, reach these larger goals of mitigating climate change and increasing nutrient density of our food. And that's it.
Thank you so much, both of you. Am I coming through clearly? I think so. I just wanted to point out a few of the really important things that I heard. First off, it's really impressive that Danone has made their massive investment in regeneration over the past several years, and they noted using long-term contracts with their suppliers, and in some cases premium pricing for goods, but also in other cases the financing of farm inputs, which is a really important way to incentivize farmers. And it's also important that Tina mentioned Danone is using 2 different frameworks to measure progress toward their regenerative goals and incentivize farmers to work with them collaboratively. It was really interesting also to hear from Sarah how the regenerative program is so aligned with their brand mission, and how important it is that MegaFoods recognizes the importance of taking responsibility for the impacts of their industry. They also noted requiring participation by all suppliers in their data sharing and tracking process, measuring progress toward regenerative goals. But for those farmers who actually verify progress, they'll be providing those financial incentives that Sarah just outlined. So those are all really important ingredients for success that you can consider. So on this slide here, what I wanted to do was offer up some examples, basically a recipe for success. This is based on my experience working with Danone and MegaFood and so many other companies in this space, and talking to many, many others. These are some of the key steps that you can use to build your own regenerative program. I don't want to go into all of them in detail now because we want time for questions, but let me highlight just a few that I know are critically important. First, get alignment on goals. What are you aiming to impact through your regenerative program? I mentioned earlier some of these independent standards focus on different types of impacts. Some are laser focused on soil health and soil carbon. Others bring in farmer livelihoods and community resilience, and still others bring in animal welfare. So get really clear with your senior management and across the organization in all functions about your goals, and then lay out your roadmap. You will also need to get a long-term commitment. This isn't a 1 or 2 year program. In order to actually achieve soil health, we need to be in this for the long term. The other advice I would give is start simple. Choose one ingredient or just one product and pilot with a small group of suppliers first, because you're going to learn so much, and so will they. Also really important, set baselines. What is the current state of soil health on the farms that you're working with? And then measure on a consistent basis. Consider using some of those frameworks that I shared with you earlier. Finally, reward farmers for progress and communicate progress externally to build on your success. One of the important things I know that you'll need to do is to make the business case. And so on the next slide here, we list some of the important benefits for brands, for farmers, and for the environment. Again, I'm not going to go through all of these in detail, and this is really just a sampling, but I think it's important for you to note that there's really a very strong business case across all of these dimensions for a regenerative sourcing and regenerative agriculture program. And I want to share a few important statistics with you. In terms of the return on investment for a regenerative program, New Hope's Next Consumer surveys have shown that shoppers have a very strong purchase intent for regenerative products. In fact, regenerative ranks third on their list of trends this year. According to their surveys, over 50% of millennials say that they'll pay more for regenerative products. Another great source is How Good. They're a sustainability ratings organization, and they collect retail sales data. A recent study that they conducted showed that of the various sustainable, quote-unquote, sustainable UPCs that they track, there are about 500 that have bona fide regenerative credentials. And those UPCs are showing a 79% growth rate versus just 5% for other products. Finally, the Carbon Trust just released a study that shows that 67% of consumers support the idea of a carbon label to demonstrate that products have been made with a commitment to reducing their carbon footprint. And there are so many other important points for your business case that I can share with you if you'd like to contact me later. Next slide, please. Now, I want to just share with you, if you're motivated to build your own regenerative program, but you want some help and guidance, NSF can walk you through this step-by-step process to build your own regenerative sourcing program to support regenerative agriculture. And this process is based on those best practices that have been shared with you today from Tina, from Sarah, and the slides I just showed you. We will share our experience in consulting with companies on responsible sourcing programs, small companies, large companies, U.S.-based supply chains, global supply chains. We'll help you through strategy, design, and implementation. So please feel free to reach out to us. I'm also happy to connect to those of you who don't source directly from farmers. I recognize many organizations do not, right? You work with brokers and ingredient suppliers. I'm happy to connect you with some other resources who can help you work directly with regenerative farmers. These are organizations like Yield Organics, Grounded Growth, Terragenesis, Mad Agriculture, and Propagate Ventures. Those are just a few. Let's move on to the next slide. So I want to leave you with this thought before we get into the Q&A. When I was thinking about the business case and the return on investment, I just come back to that really important need to address the climate crisis and need to address the soil erosion and the degradation that's happening in our farm communities. I think the most important reason that you can share with your management to build a regenerative program is actually this opportunity for business to lead in addressing some of the most challenging crises of our time. We can use our businesses and our products and our individual purchasing power as catalysts to help solve those problems. We can shift from being part of the problem to part of the solution. And we can use this marketplace-based process to create a positive feedback loop that empowers brands, farmers, and consumers to generate a better future. So I want to leave you with that. I hope that you've learned a lot and feel inspired, and we're happy to answer your questions now, and Ryan's going to walk us through those.
Yeah, we have a few questions come in, and if folks have additional questions, there's still time to enter those in through the chat or contact Nova directly. Her contact information is there on the screen. These will all be sent out following the webinar as well. So the first question we have is for Sarah about the incentive prize amounts and how those numbers were come about, or how that program was structured. So Sarah, if you could give some details about how that structure was put together.
Sure. So in our history, and like Nova said, we have I think, a unique supply system, as supply community. We do directly work with farmers, but we also have more traditional supplier relationships through co-manufacturers and brokers around the world. And so for our direct relationships with farmers, we have always given them in the past, it's been a donation of $5,000 to a charity of their choice. So what we did was we used that as the baseline of the work that we've done together, and built that as we assumed that most of our suppliers are in the gold and silver, so we wanted to make sure that we gave them at least that plus more, and we wanted it to be meaningful. So we built the system with that baseline amount, but we wanted to provide our suppliers with the opportunity to get more than that. So depending on the level, gold, silver, or bronze, they will at least get one amount. And then whatever from a budgeting standpoint we have left in the year, and we'll make increase of that commitment every year, we will then offer it as a grant opportunity for additional investment. If a farm wants to say 1 year wants to get a crimper or some farming equipment to increase their ability to no-till, or they want to invest in their wages for their employees, we will have a system by which that they can apply and then receive additional funding as a grant.
Great, thank you. And building off of that, maybe this is for Nova. That goes along with the next question we have about how brands can encourage their farmers and suppliers to initiate regenerative practices. I think that is a great example of an incentive, but Nova or anyone have ideas about other incentives that brands may be able to implement?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in, and I'm also going to ask Tina, because they've used some really innovative and creative approaches, and they've been at this for several years now. But I will say, I think I mentioned there are some long-term contract options out there, or intent to purchase, that have been used to ensure that farmers feel confident that if they actually start to shift their practices and farm the way that brands and buyers are asking them to, that there's going to be a commitment to a long-term journey, and that there will be a purchase order for the crops that they're being asked to grow, 2-3 years into the future. So long-term purchasing contracts can come in various shapes and sizes, but those are a really important tool. There's also ways to do this that do not actually add cost directly into the cost of goods. So let me try to give you some examples. There are organizations that are using various types of agronomic funds and financing for inputs. So farm equipment, training for farmers, seed purchases, and things like that can be financed by a buyer or a brand through other mechanisms. There are some organizations that are using foundations and grant funds. There are some organizations that are using unique loan and financing structures. They're working with different financial institutions and banks to do this. There are other companies that are working with NGOs, so they're contributing funds to NGOs, and then those NGOs distribute those funds to farmers. But I think one of the critical things to do in those situations, when you're not paying for regeneration through the cost of your purchases, is to make sure that you've got agreement and buy-in and support from farmers as well as your management to commit to consistent measurement. So you want those incentives to be linked somehow to data sharing about progress on those farms, and then measurement of progress. And so Sarah's example is great in terms of increasing the incentives available based on improvements in soil health. But I want to let Tina answer this as well, because as I said, they've been really innovative in this space.
Yeah, thanks, Nova. So you did touch on one of the original tactics that we used, which was long-term contracts, where we were covering the cost of essentially their production, which included any requests that we made to convert to new practices. And so we started off with that base, but now we're layering onto it. And probably the biggest thing I can share is this idea around farmer resiliency. So one of the key tenets of regenerative is that over time you're actually reducing some of the inputs that you're using within the field and converting to practices where you're sequestering carbon that in many cases will convert to higher yield. And so if a farmer is spending less money on the middleman inputs and gaining a larger amount of output from the farm that they can sell, even if they're selling that at existing commodity prices, what they're essentially doing is increasing their margin on the farm for every acre and every profit per acre. And so while Sarah said, we don't want to tell the farmers how to farm, but what we can do is show them on the leaders in the regenerative space who have gone into this and gotten a few years down the journey, and maybe have done some of the trial by failure work that we can help guide others to what the eventual solution was, rather than them also having to go through it kind of the hard way, is letting them know what these new ideas are around regenerative and how it can impact their long-term profitability is a key conversation to have with farmers as a stakeholder. And if you're in the agricultural space, you're probably very aware of the lack of farmer profitability and the high level of debt that is being borne by the farmers in the U.S. especially. Right now, it's a top-of-mind conversation for everyone in this space. And so I would say we're also at a pivotal moment where people all along the entire agricultural spectrum are looking for a different way of doing business. And some of this can be about harnessing that energy of people knowing that we need to pivot to an alternative, and helping them see how this ticks a lot of boxes, both for what we would have typically called sustainability or responsible sourcing goals, all the way through to climate change mitigation, but in the middle of that, helping farmers overall with their resiliency. So hopefully I've given a few different examples there for, I know people will take away different things from that answer that are relevant to their own supply chain, and so hopefully that gives a bit of breadth to the answer. There might be 2 or 3 things that come to mind for your own particular example.
Great, thank you. I think that's a great example. Building off of that question a little bit, kind of a 2-part question there. Maybe start with Nova, is where do you see the regenerative movement in the next 5 years? And another question about how do brands and farmers know that regenerative has kind of staying power or longevity if they were to convince decision makers to move forward, but worried that some other movement or practice may come along. So where do you see regenerative in 5 years, and do you think that this is, and how do you convince decision makers to sign on for long-term commitment?
Okay, and I'm going to open this up to Sarah and Tina, of course, as well, but I'm going to see if I can pop back to this business case, because I think, again, we didn't go into a whole lot of detail here. I could, we could work on this for days, actually, and quantifying the business case here, because behind each of these impacts, there are some interesting studies that we can point to. Let's see, I think, in 5 years, I feel like this is kind of a hidden solution, hidden in plain sight, but I'm starting to see this incredible momentum across the food and textile industry in particular, both from very large global companies as well as, the smaller, more entrepreneurial companies. And I'm seeing the level of awareness of regenerative agriculture as part of the climate solution, as part of the solution to some of the economic challenges that each of us has been talking about today, really coming to the top of the agenda. So I would venture to say that in 5 years, we could see a significant segment of the food, textile, and even perhaps the personal care industries, all of which rely very heavily on agricultural inputs, embracing regenerative agriculture programs in some form or another. Now, I'm not saying that every company is going to build their own. I think this is going to be done through coalitions and by working across industries. So I would see in 5 years from now having some very important, powerful, and impactful coalitions formed, not just here in the United States, but globally. they're already here, but they need to grow a lot more quickly. And I'm seeing the momentum behind that. When it comes to, I think the second part was, convincing senior management to support this. That's what this slide is intended to help you with. And as I mentioned, there are several studies behind these, behind the business case in each of these dimensions that we can point to. I think some of those stats that I shared in terms of consumer interest, potential, market share growth, as well as potential price premiums are really important from the brand perspective. But the reasons that Tina pointed to in terms of the longevity and resilience of our industry, and the fact that we need to produce food and textiles in a different way that actually rewards farmers for the stewardship that they're providing for all of us, those are really important aspects of the business case. So I'm sure both of you would like to jump in, Tina or Sarah.
Yeah, Sarah, I mean, from a business case, in 5 years, if we are not all thinking about this every day, we're in real trouble. I'm on farms a lot. I just got back last week from our orange growers out in California, where they've experienced massive drought over the years. Within our own supply chain, we've seen crop loss year to year increasing. This is getting worse and not getting better. So the business case really, I mean, those of you in procurement, those of you in supply chain management of some sort, or in sustainability, or just in overall operations or executive level at your company, are either starting to see the impact of climate change on your business, or you will be about to. The business case truly is preserving not only your business, but the way that we eat food and live in community. And so I see that it's imperative that this is part of the dialogue of business in 5 years. And I believe, to your point, Nova, that coalition building is the way that we are going to get there. What I can say as a smaller to mid-sized business from a business side, what this allows us to do is have a bigger play within the suppliers also that we are working with. We often don't have a lot of leverage because we are part of a global supply chain as a smaller company. But as our community of suppliers see us investing in them and caring about the work that they're doing, they prioritize the work that they do for us. It's this mutually beneficial, symbiotic relationship, and so I would add that as another business case for the work that we're doing that kind of underlies all of what you've seen here on the screen.
Yeah, so just to add, this is Tina. As Nova stated at the very beginning of this, to sustain is no longer enough. And if we sustain, then to Sarah's point, in about 5 years, we're going to be in a really tough spot across a lot of segments of the agricultural system. So we're at a pivotal moment on carbon emissions and the potential for sequestration. And at Danone, we've committed to halving our greenhouse gas emissions between now and 2030, with additional commitments around 2050. And we view soil carbon sequestration as being a key and pivotal role in how we actually go about sequestering carbon within our own supply chain and beyond. So for us, the need around this approach is only going to increase over time, and we believe strongly that a lot of other big players in this space are taking that same approach. If you look at General Mills, for example, they have a multifaceted approach and have taken this topic very seriously. I'm sure a lot of you saw their recent commitment around regenerative agriculture acres, and that may even be one of the reasons you were curious about this topic and joined today. When you look at who the players are that are embracing in this space and making bold commitments, they're players that are like us that are leading the pack. And the other thing I would say is that it is going to take all of us joining together on approaches like regenerative organic certification or on SCI, Soil Carbon Initiative, in order to change the model. Each one of us can play a role but we would invite all of you to join the companies that are presented today in this regenerative journey to help create a stronger agricultural model that supports all of society for tomorrow.
Thanks for all of those great responses. I know we're just about out of time, so I think we're going to have to leave the rest of our questions for our FAQ summary. It's going to go out. Nova, unless you have any last points you want to make for any of those.
Yeah, thank you. I want to thank everyone who joined us today. As I said, I'm seeing a rising awareness of the need for companies to take responsibility and to also improve their business model by adopting regenerative sourcing practices and supporting regenerative agriculture. And I especially want to thank Tina and Sarah and Danone and MegaFood and all of the others who've been involved in this movement. And I know some of you are on the phone today. I tried to mention some of the names of your organizations as well for all of the work that you're doing. And for those of you who are interested and not sure exactly where to begin, this webinar is the first of many that we will be sharing with you, and I hope that you learned a lot from this. We're happy to dive deeper into any of the topics that we covered today. Please feel free to reach out to us and know that we'll be sending out answers to some of the questions we didn't get to by email to all of you. And I guess I would just encourage you to take what you've learned and start to work within your organization to get started, and get started today. As I mentioned, we have about 10 years to reverse climate change, and this is one of the golden opportunities to support regenerative agriculture in doing that work. And our future depends on you playing a role. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Nova.